challenges reaching for the sky. Education, infrastructure, let's pave the way. With fiscal responsibility, we'll seize the day. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands. Plans in our hands. Progress where every voice stands. In the progress, from the ground in the mountain, to the oil and gas scene, together we'll build a future strong and keen. Strong and keen. Tune in every Wednesday. Feel the diversity, stories and insights that we all prescribe. Plans, policies, and progress. Diversity and discussion. Let's support one another. In the heart of our nation, where voices collide, we're breaking down the policies with truth as our guide. With clarity on the mic, bringing light to the fight. Together we're ready, shining bright. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands. Exploring the progress where every voice stands. From the ground impact to the oil and gas scene, together we'll build a future strong and keen. We'll dive into the data, the numbers don't lie. Examining the challenges, reaching for the sky. Education, infrastructure, let's pave the way. With fiscal responsibility, we'll seize the day. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands. Exploring the progress where every voice stands. From the ground impact to the oil and gas scene, together we'll build a future strong and keen. Whoa, tune in every Wednesday, feel the vibe. For the stories and insights that we all prescribe. Plans, policies, and progress we'll uncover. With every discussion, let's support one another. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands. Exploring the progress where every voice stands. Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Behind the Agenda. It's the 14th of May, 2025, and welcome once again. Today, we're going to be breaking down the headlines and questioning the narratives and putting issues under the microscope. We've got a full docket this evening, and trust me, these conversations we must have. Let's start with a topic that has stirred no small amount of confusion, the conflicting stats on adolescent birth rates in Guyana. A recent letter to the editor in Starbrook News attempts to explain the discrepancy between the Ministry of Health data and the figures published by the UNFPA. But what does this really say about our data management? Then we turn to the currency crunch. Team Mohammed and their affiliates want the public to believe that the US sanctions against them are the real reasons behind Guyana's ongoing foreign exchange shortage. Is that claim even grounded in reality? Or is this a clever attempt to reframe their legal troubles as national economic issues? We'll examine the facts and expose the fiction. And finally, our guest just returned from Suriname, where important conversations were had about the local content, trade, and Guyana's non-oil export capacity. Three big topics, one platform, and of course, we love to hear your voice in all of this. So make sure you leave your comments and questions in the comment section. It's time for Behind the Agenda. Join me in welcoming on screen our guest who joins us every week, none other than Joel Bagwodin. Joel, good evening. Welcome to the program.
Good evening, Cardell. Good evening to the viewers. It's good to be here as always. It's a pleasure.
So let's start with the Starbrook newsletter, the adolescent birth rate discrepancy. How do we explain such a wide gap between the adolescent birth rate reported by the Ministry of Health and the UNFPA? And is this a case of poor interagency communication or deliberate narrative shaping?
On this occasion, Cardell, I think it's a lack of education in how these data are compiled, the reference report where the author. So let me give a background. So a letter was written by someone, a letter writer, and the following day, Starbrick News editorialized that letter. Now, the author was of that letter was basically saying that the data reported by the government of Ghana to the United Nations does not correspond to other empirical data from other sources, and the person cite other the World Bank report and another institution, two different institutions. When they correspond the data did not um, it did not correspond to each other. There were some variances, there were some discrepancies, and he also was questioning the credibility of the government of Guyana's data on the adolescent or teenage pregnancy and so on, the rate of teenage pregnancy. Now, so what? So when I read it and I read it the first day, and then when I saw Starbrick News editorialized it, then I said, no, I have to deal with it. Now, from the author's perspective, whoever wrote the letter, I think it was not anything to do with narrative or 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 there was no mischievous intent. Um, I think it is a lack of knowledge in terms of the data compilation and the explanation. It required a deeper analysis in terms of the methodology, etc. And you would have gotten your answer. The person is obviously um, not have that level of skill set. Um, where Starbrick News was concerned at editorialized the letter, but they they took the opportunity to now question whether how credible is the data and reports coming from the government of Ghana. So they went to a little bit of a spin, um, but not too much of damage or too much damages were done. Now, the thing is, I dealt with it and I explained that you got to look at the methodology, the source of the data. If we are looking at three different reports, one, the report originating from the government of Ghana, original source of the data, the data, health indicators, health statistics originate from the Ministry of Health because they collect all the data. So they have all the actual data, and therefore the original, authentic, credible source will obviously be the Ministry of Health and by extension the government of Ghana because that is the agency that collects the data,
Right.
right? And so that is actual data, that is not estimates and assumptions. Now, when you look at the other reports that the author made reference to, the World Bank, and people tend to think, and we need to move away from this is a culture here in Guyana. You hear World Bank and IMF people, it's gospel to them, Or World Bank has more credibility than the government of Guyana. Or an analyst or an economist who is attached to the World Bank has more credibility than a local economist or a local analyst. No, they all we all study the same thing and you read the same textbook and you learn the same thing. So nobody is more credible than anybody, right? Or nobody is better than anybody. You just have to apply yourself, apply critical thinking and do the analysis. So the the report by the World Bank, when you read and understand the methodology, it is based on estimates and a completely different methodology in terms of the statistical model that they develop, which is based on assumptions and the data, the original, the source of the data will come from the ministry, but it will be dated information. It will be data they collect the data from the United Nations database. Where does the United Nations get their data from? The United Nations get their data from the government of Ghana when we submit those reports. So, as of that time, which is not so long ago, just a few days ago, or maybe less than a week ago, those reports by the World Bank and the United Nations database would have been based on data submitted to the United Nations a couple of years ago from the government of Ghana, right, which is the original source. And therefore, their estimates, the World Bank's estimate and forecast of the same indicators to present, will be based on that data presented a few years ago, and they make their assumptions. So it is not actual data. So their methodology is different. Now that you have an up to date report submitted with up to date actual data, no estimate from the original source, those same database now, um, the World Bank database and the United Nations database, they will now take this up to date information or data set, and they will go and make modifications to their database. They will update their database, and they will make the appropriate adjustments to their models. So
Mm.
simply put, the differences in the data between the World Bank and the United Nations and what is submitted by the government of Ghana is simply that the government of Guyana is the original source where the data originates. It is the actual data, not an estimated, and not a forecast or not based on estimates and assumptions.
Mm.
And the World Bank and other sources, other institutions, their data are based on estimates and assumptions. So that's the difference.
Okay. Okay. Now, I want to bring your attention to the forex shortage that Guyana is currently experiencing. Now, T. Mohammed wants persons to believe that their sanctions are causing the foreign exchange shortage. Now, is this economic gaslighting, or is there any truth to their claim?
It's absolutely nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. Absolute, complete, total nonsense. So I saw when the post was made, and I immediately put out something debunking it. Now, let me deal with a simple element first. The simple the simple statistic to debunk that notion is that they're suggesting that because they're sanctioned, gold export earnings, the foreign exchange earnings have dropped, have declined in the banking system. If you go to the source of the data, which is Bank of Guyana and the Bureau of Statistics, you would quickly see that gold exports have almost doubled from since over the last decade. From 2014 to 2024, gold earnings, foreign exchange earnings have doubled to from just over 450 million back in 20, 2014 to almost 1 billion US dollars, to almost nearly 1 billion US dollars in gold, in foreign exchange earnings from gold exports that we earned in 2024. So there is no decline in foreign exchange. The foreign exchange earnings has doubled over the last decade. So we're talking about the earnings. We're talking about production. Production is a different production.
Mm.
One of the reasons why we have that, we have had fluctuating production, and we know we can get into that. We have the issue of smuggling on the declaration. You had a period in 2015, 2020 when APNU, AFC came in, and they practically destroyed the mining sector with all the draconian taxes that they add on, lack of investment, because in mining, You got to invest in interior roads and that type interior infrastructure to be able to access it. So that period, you would see, if you look at the production data, you would see that production fluctuated. But what has happened is that gold price has almost doubled or more than doubled um,
Mm.
prices. So we've benefited from rising prices on the on the global market for gold exports. So that's why the earnings, while production went up and down for various reasons, earnings continue to climb steadily, right? Now, having established that, so that's the first fact. Fact number one to debunk such theory that the sanction cause or the sanction has any role to play in the foreign currency shortage that sections of the private sector are complaining about. Now, this issue with, I wouldn't say a shortage, there is no shortage. There is unavailability, there is a difference. Because remember, I've spent here in this program on several other episodes where I went into the macro data. I've shown how the reserves have increased, the total reserve in the banking system, commercial banks, Bank of Guyana, the Natural Resources Fund have increased. We have from less than 2 months import cover to nearly 8 months of import cover. Those are
Right.
those are solid indicators. So our foreign exchange reserves, or let's say our net foreign sector assets, financial assets, have been steadily increasing, not declining. So it is inaccurate to say, because it is empirically disproven, the statistics does not support the notion that we have a shortage.
Mm.
So from an empirical basis, there is no shortage of foreign currency. The country does not have a foreign currency problem. Our balance of payment have been recording surpluses. What we have is unavailability, which is a different matter. Shortage and unavailability is two different things. So what we have is momentary or temporary unavailability of foreign exchange in the market. That is what, and we've been having this problem, or we've been having, or this has, this issue, this phenomenon, let me put it that way, has developed not today, not now, not in 2024, not in 2020. This is an issue that has developed and that continued to persist since 2017.
Mm.
In fact, it actually, I was tracking this thing from the beginning. I was tracking this thing, and so I'll tell you exactly when it started. It started in November of 2016. November of 2016, this problem started to develop, and it continues. Now, as it over that period of time, the reasons why this issue continued to persist have become a little bit more dynamic,
Mm.
right? So when it first started in late 2016, moving into 2017, it was resolved in 2018. Resolved meaning we didn't have the issue, nobody complained then. What was happening is that the commercial banks have and predominantly two commercial banks, two of the six commercial banks. They have a lot of foreign exchange on their books in the region of hundreds of millions of dollars. And they invest it in market securities in other markets, regionally and outside of the region. For example, they invest in, so just how here in Guyana, the government of Guyana would raise domestic borrowings by selling treasury bills. Treasury bills, treasury bill is a short-term debt financing instrument that is used to raise funding to finance government spending, right? So the banks locally would buy up those treasury bills, which
Mm.
in turn finances the government spending, which we call the domestic borrowing by the government, the domestic debt. The domestic debt is raised by way of issuing treasury bills through the central bank, and the local financial institutions will buy those treasury bills and to effectively finance government spending, which is the domestic component of government debt or public debt. Now,
Right.
similarly, governments in the region, they raise funding through the issuance of treasury bills, not only domestically, but on international markets. So, a local institution in Ghana can purchase the government of Trinidad treasury bills, invest in the government of Trinidad treasury bills. A local institution in Guyana, could you lock the door to keep out the noise? A local institution in Guyana could purchase the government of Jamaica treasury bill and finance the Jamaican. So this is what I'm referring to in the technical term market securities.
Okay.
Government financing government spending regionally by investing in these instruments, as well as to some extent corporate bonds to finance private sector in other countries. This level of investment by the commercial banks represents has been growing over the years from as low as 40% of their total net foreign assets to as high as 60, then eventually 90, and one time 99% of their total net foreign assets. So that means they're increasing their overseas investment in these instruments outside of the local market. And that is the main factor when this problem started to develop, that was contributing to the unavailability, not a shortage, unavailability of foreign currency. So when those securities mature, when they're liquidated, they bring back money, etc. Now, however, it has become a little bit more complex,
Mm.
whereby that practice by the commercial banks is still happening. They're still investing. They have the total foreign sector assets in the commercial banking sector is over 500 million US. And their investment in market securities outside of the domestic market is in the region of 80 to 90% of their total assets, total foreign sector assets. Not total assets, their total foreign sector is subset of the total asset. One
Right.
category, the foreign sector assets. Now, that is not necessarily viewed as an issue now because the government has the central bank, through the central bank, because we have more foreign exchange coming in from the NRF. So back in 2016, 2017, in the pre-oil period, that was a big issue because your main source of foreign exchange was from the traditional sectors. We didn't have oil then, right? We didn't have oil then. But now that investment, that this is why the government is not, we just get blackout. This is why the government is not harassing the banks or
Mm.
dealing with. Are you hearing me? You
Yes,
hear me?
I
Yeah.
was waiting to
Let me
see
know.
it cut
Let
off,
me.
but I guess you got back up.
I got back up, but you can barely see me. Let me see if I put on my phone light, what can happen. Let me see if we can work some magic. So I put on my phone light. So we can go until the backup run out, right?
All right, go ahead.
So as I'm saying, so that practice by the commercial banks is no longer an issue necessarily for a few reasons. A, because we now have foreign exchange coming in from other sources, mainly the NRF. So the banks are pretty much allowed to do that because the central bank has sufficient foreign reserve to intervene in the market. And the second reason why the banks are allowed to do that, because it is a mechanism that is helping to, that together with the NRF, the Natural Resource Fund, are mechanisms that are helping to manage and contain, or mitigate rather, the effects of what is called the Dutch disease. If you bring back all this money into the market, you flood the market, you'll have a sharp appreciation of the exchange rate, and then you will destroy the traditional export sectors. So that's the reason. So we don't have a foreign currency shortage problem. We have unavailability, right? So these are the factors. Then there is another issue there's another issue that I spoke of in some groups, in some private groups. I think I should put it in the public domain because it's an important issue with respect to the local content. Local content irrespective.
Something's really wrong with your audio. I don't know what you just do there, but you're coming over very muffled.
I think maybe you hearing me better now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are the main issues. So let me, in the interest of not necessarily time, but I don't know how much more backup power I have. Those are the main points to note and the main facts to note with regard to the foreign exchange. And the short answer is no. The sanction is not has zero role to play in that regard. Zero role to play in that regard.
It would be safe to say this could be just public relations maneuvering to shift blame from illicit financial conduct
Attention
to the
seeking.
government and the central bank.
Attention seeking. What has, from my vantage point, what I see has to happen is that the the central bank has the capacity to intervene in the market because we don't have a shortage, and that intervention has to be timed. It has to be timed because you don't want the exchange rate to appreciate too sharply, you don't want it to depreciate too sharply either. And I think it is something that the central bank could perhaps um, monitor and manage a little bit more closely so that they're more timely intervention. So those
Mm,
so those are so those are the issues, right?
mm, mm.
There's some amount of leakages in the system, but that's a topic by itself to talk about. I maybe I should not elaborate on it now on this episode, given that we have blackout, because I don't want to leave it halfway and then people get and understand it fully. People don't understand it fully, so I'll hold back on the leakages. But what I would say is that whatever in my estimation, whatever leakages there are, we have to plug it. But I don't think, anecdotally, I don't think that the the degree of the leakages in the system is material enough to to cause any major issue. Notwithstanding, it's something that we have to address, and we have to build up our capacity and so on to deal with. Now, if the power cut, I see the light blinking.
I was like, what was that?
Okay. Yeah. If the power comes on back, maybe we could revisit this particular subtopic, and I'll go a little bit more in detail to explain it.
Yeah, no, let me take you across to your recent trip to Suriname, recently concluded trip to Suriname. You're invited to, and you've been on this program where you've spoken about Suriname and its developing oil sector. The fact that we are several steps ahead of them, we're in production and actually benefiting from our oil resources. Um, they invited you over there to talk about local content and some other stuff. Walk us through the trip and give us an idea of how Surinamis are looking at our local content policy and if they're trying to implement something similar and what information you were able to share with them as you had an integral role, in the local content policy.
Yeah, so the Suriname Chamber of Commerce wrote the Ghana Oil and Gas Anti-Chamber to to have an exchange, knowledge sharing from the chamber level, between the chamber level. And the president of the chamber, who was Maniram Prashad, he sent a letter to me. Now I'm a sitting director on the chamber. He sent a letter to me, and he put me on to deal with it, and to meet with the chamber, and to walk them through and share with them our lessons and so on. And so that's where it started. And it was supposed to be a virtual meeting. This happened. This was something that it's on the night of the unrest in Guyana. The
Mm,
unrest, that was the night I was in Suriname,
wow.
speaking to the members. They had maybe close to, my estimate was maybe close to 100, at least more than 50, more than 50 members.
Your audio is gone again.
Yeah, you hear me
Go ahead.
now?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm saying that they had maybe, based on my rough estimation, maybe close to 100 members who were in the room that I was presenting to, um, who were eager to learn how Guyana implement its local content legislation, and they were asking for guidance, and basically I share our success story with them and the
Mm,
lessons that we learned. And they want to know whether should they do a policy or should they do legislation. And I said, policy don't work. Policy has never worked. You look at all the literature around the world. You look at Trinidad and Tobago, that has been in this business for over 100 years. They have a policy. They don't have a legislation, and it has never worked in terms of delivering the desired result as as when you move to legislation. And so we fought. I told them the story of how we fought for legislation, how the oil companies were pushing back against it, and the challenges that we had. I walked them through how the previous government was not interested in moving to the legislation because they were facilitating the requests of the oil companies. And I walked them through that entire thing. And we know the story well. We know the story well. The challenge is how we got to the legislation. So
right.
they recently in December they had the final investment decision, and since then they're now trying to get things in place and get as much guidance and learn as much from, and then turning to Guyana firstly to learn what to do, because nothing is happening there. Nothing is happening in terms of the Suriname private sector. They don't know. And we have been in that place. We came from there, and we've learned a lot, and we've come a far way in terms of from the time of oil discovery to Forsal to where we are today. So I think it was a good opportunity to exchange information, and it was a good It was a rich discussion as well because the audience there, who were made up of entrepreneurs, corporate members of the chamber,
Right.
their private sector, they were asking all sorts of very good questions that allowed, that stimulated much more in-depth and robust discussions in terms of lessons that I could have shared with them in Guyana, some of our own challenges and so on, related challenges and so on in
Right.
that. So yeah.
Yeah. So, were the discussions on trade as well? And if so, Guyana and Suriname has had a long relationship in terms of trade. There has been talk of this new bridge that's supposed to, I think, it's the Quarantine River. They're supposed to be bridging there between Guyana and Suriname. Um, how does that impact our oil and gas sector and just trade in general between the two countries? Having that, and are Surinamese looking to invest more in Guyana?
Well, one of the things that I said to them that has proven successful, although it has its challenges, and I share some of the challenges that I'm aware of, is that because there is Trinidad and there is Suriname. Suriname has some amount of capacity, some amount of limited amount of experience in the field. So we have a lot of Trinidadians coming here forming joint ventures. We have some Surinamese group here forming joint ventures to build capacity and to go after the opportunities in the sector. And I emphasized the importance of having that sort of approach, forming consortium, etc.,
Mm,
because the opportunities are going to be greater than you alone could go after, than you alone could target. And you have to do that if you really want to, reap the fruits that this opportunity, that this sector will bring. In terms of the bridging the two countries, of course, that will contribute in a positive way to, in terms of the flow of trade between the two countries, movement of goods and services and people. Because we've been able to build up our capacity uh, over the last 5 years, I can tell you that some of the tier one contractors that are here who are going over in Suriname to service the Suriname upstream sector, they're also taking some of our Guyanese companies, subcontractors that are providing the services because the capacity is not there in Suriname. So it
right.
presents a great opportunity for us here in Guyana to position ourselves in the Suriname market to service and to help to start up their industry, while, of course, forming partnerships, identifying partnerships in Suriname to build their own capacity, similar as we have done here in Guyana. And
Mm,
so, and then, I mean, we could talk about the bridge from many different dimensions in terms of how that bridge is important from facilitating trade between the two countries. You have to tie that into with other developments that are earmarked for for that region. You have the, for example, the Deepwater Port that the president talks about, the one that they're looking at, that will be exclusively for the gas, for another gas pipe to service that the developing the gas resources. Then there is another port talked about that will be developed by the local port operators. That those developments, those investments will create a lot of opportunities in that region, job opportunities, and in terms of facilitating trade between the two countries there as well.
mm, mm. No, you mentioned Trinidad a bit earlier. The new prime minister over there has said that they will be looking to Guyana and Suriname as well. But Guyana, we're already in oil production and that kind of thing. From your knowledge and assessment, what does this mean for Guyana and Guyanese? Trinidad looking to, and you did mention before, we've had some Trinidadians coming and forming consortiums and stuff like that. But from the prime minister's perspective, where the government now will be looking to Guyana to, I don't know how, to play a part in our oil resources. Give us your assessment of this.
I'm glad you raised that question. I really wish the card comes on back now because it's a question that I really want to take my time to elaborate on. Now, I saw the media, our media here in Ghana, our local media, sort of, how do I put this over? I don't want to say misrepresented. I think there is a misconception or a misunderstanding. There is a misunderstanding by the media that I saw reported on this question of Trinidad and Guyana collaborating in terms of developing our gas resources. By God, and mostly, for instance, I saw, and then the Trinidad energy minister said he read the vice president remark and he's prepared to have discussions. So I think there is a misunderstanding by the media, and I want to take this opportunity to clarify what the vice president said in regard to Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago exploring joint development of the gas resources. So he said that right now we don't have enough gas resource to collaborate with Trinidad or anybody to develop the resources, right? Now, that he does not mean that we don't have any resource to work with Trinidad at all. The proven gas resources that we have, which is linked to the gas pipeline that we've built to run, which is the Wales gas to shore or the gas to energy at Wales. The gas, which is that gas, which is from the Liza, I think Liza Phase 2 field, right? It's I think it's about 50 million per day, right? That is all, that is what we have there. And we need all of it. We need all of it. We don't have enough to say we will do a joint project with Trinidad or anybody else. All of the gas from that field, we need all of it to for two main things: the the power plant, right, to transition away from the fossil fuel, so that will reduce our energy costs, and the other facilities they're building there. So that alone is gonna be will be used up for that. In future development, however, in other fields that we have to explore, and that's why they put together a team um, that will work with Exxon and the government of Guyana to explore and to conduct feasibility studies in other fields where they might have more gas, and those future fields where you may have gas resources, we can then explore joint development with Trinidad and Tobago
Right.
and Suriname as well. So I think there was some misunderstanding from my reading of it, how the media carried it, and I think it's important that I clarify this, um, for the benefit of the viewers.
Now, Joel, I think we're going to wrap here for this evening. I don't want you to get cut off mid conversation. I'd
Yeah,
like to thank you
yes,
for.
yeah, I'm deliberately restraining my responses. There's a lot more that I want because we still have some time.
Yeah,
There are at least two subtopics that I would have liked to elaborate some more and get into some other details, but I don't want to go in and then there's an abrupt cut. So I'm holding back for tonight, and let's have an early night.
yeah. So, guys, join us again next week, Wednesday, same time, same place, where we have Joel breaking down all the plans, policies, and all the issues that are topical to us here in Guyana, giving us an in depth, behind the curtains look. And layman's terms, breaking down those technical terms into layman terms for us to understand. Joel, thank you for being here with us. Do have a wonderful evening. I hope your lights come back on soon. Please don't send the blackout this way. But take care and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Take care. Guys, that's all for me on this episode of Behind the Agenda. Remember, tune in next week, Wednesday, same time, same place, 7:30 to 8:30, right here on Livewire TV, Livewire News, Livewire TV on YouTube as well. Until next time, I'm Cordell Jones saying take care.
Behind the agenda.